So at this point in time, we want to welcome to our discussion Dalia Ziada, Egyptian scholar and senior fellow at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs, and Mr. Gidi Grinstein, former peace negotiator under Prime Minister Ehud Barak. Thank you both very much for joining us. Dalia Ziada, I would like to begin with you, and to an extent, at the very end of the discussion. Is there stage two? Will there be stage two? And we are currently merely, talking the terms, or are we still pondering its mere existence?
I'm not very optimistic that we will get to stage two, especially with all the practices that Hamas are doing. This ceasefire was mainly a lifeline actually thrown to Hamas at a very critical time. And Hamas, instead of taking this lifeline that was thrown to them by their allies in Qatar and perhaps Egypt as well, unfortunately, they misused it and insisted on humiliating the hostages, those who are alive and those even who were killed by them. And they are playing all the psychological games that we have been seeing over the past few weeks, which even makes it now more difficult for both the mediators and for Israel to agree on any next steps with such an organization that's only a terrorist organization that's only concerned with flexing its muscles and just showing we are still the ones in control here, instead of really working on making progress with ceasefire and getting a long-term solution to this issue.
So, Gidi Grinstein, I would insist on the very same question. Are we, again, seeing this arm wrestling on behalf of the different mediators, different parties, or are we indeed facing the question of the resumption of this deal?
Ellie, thank you very much for having me. And I just want to add a different layer of complexity to what Dalia just mentioned. We have to remember that this ceasefire deal has 3 phases of 6 weeks each. It's 18 weeks altogether. And the first phase, 6 weeks, which we're now coming to the end of, is very detailed. The next phase is kind of general. So there had to be a negotiation on implementation agreement on the phase 2 of the deal, which is what we're beginning to do right now. Of course, everything Dalia said is absolutely correct, that these ceremonies, vicious ceremonies, cynical ceremonies complicated the situation. But fundamentally, the strategic conundrum has been there from day one. And that is that the government of Israel is unwilling to consider the introduction of the Palestinian Authority to replace Hamas in Gaza. And therefore, we're locked, because the government of Israel says Hamas leadership has to leave, Gaza has to be demilitarized, without even saying who's going to enforce the demilitarization of Gaza, because that requires weapons to enforce demilitarization. And the third thing is that all hostages have to be released. Meanwhile, Hamas says that in order to move ahead with the deal, there has to be a full release of prisoners, full withdrawal of Israeli forces, and then moving to what they call sustainable calm. The only way to bridge these approaches is, and eventually allow for Hamas to leave, is obviously to extend the ceasefire, but also to introduce the Palestinian Authority. And until we turn that corner, I think we're stuck on the strategic level, and therefore I'm kind of pessimistic that phase 2 will happen. That being said, the Americans are very assertive.
Exactly.
They have gone around the region. They've heard the Arab side. They know that the Trump plan for Gaza, it may be some sort of a long-term idea, may or may not happen at some distant point in the future. Meanwhile, right now, they understand that without a self-governing Palestinian Authority that is not Hamas, there is no alternative to Hamas in Gaza. And I believe that Israel may be surprised with a deal that the Americans put on the table, just like what happened on January 18th.
So speaking to that point exactly, Dalia, we do hear at least the very beginning of this change in tune from regional Arab powers in light of this change in the music, not just the rhetoric, but also the substance of the Trump administration.
Of course, the Trump statement was very shocking to everyone, that the U.S. will take over Gaza, or the U.S. will find the solution of Gaza. But actually, it was a big motivator for Arab leaders to start working on really finding a solution for Gaza. Before that, everyone among all the Arab leaders were looking at the problem in Gaza as if it is Israel's problem. The terrorism there is Israel's problem. The security situation is Israel's problems. I agree with what Gidi said. The Palestinian Authority cannot be a replacement for Hamas. And there is no solution that could happen in the next step, actually, without Hamas being removed from power in Gaza. And the big question here is how much Arab countries are willing to contribute to ensuring security in Gaza while also proceeding with the construction process, which we know very well will not take less than 10 or perhaps 20 years. It's a huge process. Right now, Arab leaders are meeting with each other. We saw the Riyadh summit on Friday, and on March 4th, there will be an emergency Arab League summit. Egypt is inviting as many members of the Arab League as it can in order to present a unified stance, a political unified stance against Trump's plan. However, they are not providing any concrete solution until now. From all the documents that are being leaked from the Egyptian plan, the Jordanian plan, even the Saudi Arabia plan, there is no solution other than just copying all what happened, like the steps they followed in previous confrontations or consequences of confrontations between Israel and Hamas, which of course cannot be applied to the situation we are in today because it's very different in many ways.
So Gidi Grinstein, listening very carefully to what Dalia Ziada is saying, she essentially saying we thought that all cards were out, that Israel wanted the hostages, that Hamas wanted the war to end, and this is it. But now there's a new factor here, and this is the Arab motivation to get more proactive. This would potentially be the game changer here.
100%. That the shocking statement of President Trump pushed the Arab side to put forward new ideas, and they have been sitting on their hands for a long time. But on this I totally agree with Dalia, but there is one point I have a different perspective, and that is that for the Arab side, they said very clearly, repeatedly, over and over again, they will not come into Gaza unless invited by a legitimate Palestinian entity, because otherwise they themselves will be seen as occupiers of Gaza. So the only legitimate entity that can invite the Arab parties to come into Gaza, begin to establish security, replace Hamas, do reconstruction. There's only two entities, either the PLO or the Palestinian Authority, probably both. This is kind of a fundamental cornerstone of any future political arrangement in Gaza. And I do want to say that the government of Israel is very weak in these negotiations. Obviously, we have the military power, that's clear. But where we are weak is, for example, Witkoff says to Dermer, hey, Dermer, you want Hamas leadership out, you want all the prisoners, you want demilitarization of Gaza. And then what? What happens in Gaza then? Do you guys settle in Gaza? Does it become Israeli territory? Does it become American territory? And Dermer doesn't have an answer. Dermer doesn't have an answer even to the theoretical scenario in which someone says yes to all the Israeli claims. And that's why the Israeli policy is very weak. And that's why I think, honestly, I hope that the Trump administration will simply put forward a plan like they did, like they pushed January 18th. Yeah. And that's the only way to move to phase 2.
So the ability to say what you do want to see and not just what you do not want to see, perhaps is this is what will bring us forward. Dalia Ziada, Gidi Grinstein, thank you very much for your time, for your insight. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.